Hello, my name is Jurgen Willems, and I will present this paper that I write together with my colleague Dominik Vogel. And the title is The Dark Side of Fading Sector Boundaries, the Reputation Effect of Lost Independence. The non-profit sector, or the non-governmental sector, is defined by what it does not do. So it does not distribute profits among shareholders, and it is organized in a private way. And these are actually two characteristics, two important signals for non-profit stakeholders, because they signal independence and trust. For example, when we give a donation, we know, or at least we expect, because it is a non-profit organization, that our donation is used not to distribute it as profit among shareholders. So a clear distinction from the non-profit sector, so a clear distinction between the non-profit sector and the profit and the public sector might be an important element for stakeholders to support and rely on this sector. However, we see an increasing body of literature that focuses on the benefits of cross-sectoral collaborations. For example, we see more and more collaborations between non-profit and for-profit organizations in the context of corporate social responsibility, or we see hybrid forms like social enterprises. We also see more collaboration between public and non-profit organizations. For example, public services are delivered through non-profit organizations, and non-profit organizations get in return a fixed amount of subsidies on a yearly basis, for example. And we also see a large body of literature on collaborations between the public and the private sector, for example, in public-private partnerships, where both parties try to obtain or achieve their own goals and try to strive for a win-win situation where both public and private profit goals are achieved. When we combine these two perspectives, we can actually derive the question on whether the one perspective is influencing the other. So when boundaries between sectors are blurring, non-profit stakeholders might actually perceive this as the non-profit sector is not that independent anymore, and therefore also they might lose their trust in these organizations, and as a result also decide that their donation or their volunteer time is likely not going to be used for a true cause anymore, but might actually help profit companies to become richer, or it might not be independent anymore from public services. So therefore we test the hypothesis: cross-sector dependence results in lower direct stakeholder support for non-profit organizations. So for this study, we conducted 3 experiments, each time with a different sample, and we also test different forms of dependencies. So each experiment has a between group design. It's our vignette study, so we give descriptions about non-profit organizations and we compare then whether respondents in different groups react differently to it. We used a Qualtrics panel for study 1 and 3, and we used a convenience sample for study 2. In the first experiment, we test whether political dependence of a public service organization has an influence on the willingness of people to give suggestions to improve the impact of this organization. So the questionnaire was sent to a US sample with 207 people. So we used the vignette of a newly found nonprofit organization, and this new nonprofit organization was actually asking for new ideas from the respondents how this organization could improve its future impact. So we had 3 treatment groups. In the first group, the first group just received a neutral description, a normal description about this organization. In the second group, we really manipulated in the direction that the organization was really politically dependent. And then the third group, we added several statements that this organization really tried to be as politically independent as possible. And we also did a manipulation check for that, and that also worked out quite well. And as a dependent variable, we asked respondents to give feedback in an open box, like how can this new organization actually improve its impact in the near future. And then Dominik and I, we both coded these answers in a dummy variable, whether it was constructive feedback or whether there was no feedback at all, or just an opinion statement that wasn't really contributing to this organization. In the red box are the results of our treatments, and actually what we see is there are no significant effects. So whether or not this organization was politically dependent or independent didn't have an effect on the suggestions that people gave for this organization. As a control variable, we asked the mission valence too, so how valent was this organization for the respondent, based on the 4 items from the study of the paper of Wright and Pendy from 2011, and we actually found a quite strong effect there and a significant effect. So what can we derive from this first experiment? That actually people were willing to give suggestions when they liked the organization, actually regardless whether this organization was politically dependent or independent. For the second experiment, we looked at an environmental non-profit organization, and we wanted to test whether or not collaborating with for-profit organizations had an effect on stakeholder supporting intentions. So we looked at a convenience sample of 140 German students. As a vignette, we gave a description of a non-profit organization which had an environmental mission, and also we gave a little bit of information about the organizational approach. And then again, we had 3 treatment groups, one neutral description where we just gave this mission and organizational approach. In one treatment group, we gave explicit information that this non-profit organization was collaborating with profit organizations to achieve its goal. And then in the third group, we gave the same basic information, but then we added information where we said that this organization deliberately did not collaborate with for-profit organizations in order to achieve its mission. So the dependent variable was this time a scale variable. I had 2 scales, so one scale, the likeliness to donate from -3 to +3, and the interest to volunteer also on a 7-point Likert scale from -3 to +3. And these are the results of the second experiment, at least for the dependent variable interest to volunteer. And we actually confirmed the same results as the first experiment. So the treatments, whether or not the organization was collaborating or not, there's no significant effect of these treatments. We also asked, similar to mission valence, we asked whether respondents had an interest in environmental organizations. And we saw that this control variable actually much better explains why people would volunteer for this organization. For the dependent variable likeliness to donate, we do find an effect in one of the treatment groups. So for the group where there was information that the non-profit organization deliberately did not collaborate with profit organizations, there we find a higher likeliness that respondents would donate. However, there is no difference between the group where information was given about collaborations and the neutral group. So collaborating does not have a negative effect, but explicit information about not collaborating had a positive effect in this experiment. Also here, the variable that measured personal interest of the respondent in environmental organizations again shows a strong, significant positive effect, which is quite logical. When they like these kind of organizations, they're also more likely to donate to these organizations. We also tested the interaction. So when they got information about collaborations or no collaboration, the effect is not significant at the 0.05 level, but there might be a trend that when people really like these kind of organizations, but they see a collaboration with for-profit companies, that there might be a lower willingness to donate for such kind of organizations. In the third experiment, we wanted to go one step further by testing 2 things. So the first thing we test is, again, like in the 2 previous experiments, the relatedness between dependence and stakeholder supporting behavior. In this experiment, it's again the likeliness to donate. But we also want to test whether there is a reputational spillover effect. So when there is an organization, a non-profit organization, and it gets funding from other organizations, these other funding organizations, they also have a reputation, and we want to see whether this reputation of these funding organizations spills over to the non-profit organization and therefore influences the stakeholder supporting behavior for this non-profit organization. This time we could use a sample of employees in the United Kingdom, so 289 respondents. The vignette was a description of an actual organization, so it was an emergency and rescue non-profit organization, and we looked at their website. And we also saw on their website that in the last 2 years they received 2 grants, approximately the same size, so that was quite interesting to use. And one came from the Department of Transport, the other came from a non-profit grant foundation. So we could use this real information as treatment. So one group got a neutral description, only background about this organization. The second group received the basic information and the fact that the organization received a grant from a public department, and in the third group the basic information but that the grant came from a grant foundation. The dependent variable was likeliness to donate, and as a moderator variable, because we included this data, this experiment in a larger data collection. In the beginning of our questionnaire we asked whether people knew this public department and whether they knew this grant foundation. We also asked, in case they knew it, whether it had a positive or a negative reputation for them. And then later in the questionnaire, so when we asked several other questions on a completely different topic, we did this particular experiment and we asked them to donate for this particular organization. So we can actually also test with these extra moderators whether the reputation of these grant-giving organizations spills over to their stakeholder supporting behavior. These are the results of the third experiment, and in the red box we see that, similar to the first and the second experiment, there is no effect of dependence on stakeholder supporting behavior. In the blue box are the results of the reputation spillover effect. So we asked each respondent whether he or she knew the public department and the non-profit grant foundation that gave a grant to our focal rescue organization. And we didn't only ask whether they knew them, we also asked whether their image was rather negative or positive on a 5-point scale from -2 to +2. And we found actually that people who knew these organizations were also quite positive about it. So we can just use the dummy I know this organization or I don't know this organization to see whether a positive spillover effect exists of reputation. And when we look at the respondents who got the treatment about a grant from the public department and also knew this organization, we don't see an effect. So the coefficient is 0.385, but it's not significant. We see a significant effect for people who got the treatment that a grant was given by a non-profit foundation, and also when they knew it. And on average, we know that this group who knew this organization were also quite positive about it. We see a quite strong effect. So there we can actually confirm a reputation spillover effect from this grant foundation to our rescue non-profit organization. So when we combine the findings of these three experiments, we can actually conclude that there is no overall effect, not a positive or not a negative, of dependence or independence on stakeholder supporting behavior. There's only one small exception. That was that when an environmental organization explicitly mentions not to collaborate with profit organizations, then there was a higher likeliness for donations, but for example, not for volunteering. So it might be worthy looking further into particular contexts where dependence or independence might be relevant, but overall we could not confirm this relationship. We did, however, find the first indication of reputational spillover effect. So probably independence or dependence in general doesn't really matter, but the specific characteristics of collaboration partners might be quite relevant. So next research steps could be to look much more into detail in organizational characteristics of partnering organizations. We also played around a little bit with stakeholder support types. So we looked at donations, we looked at giving suggestions, we looked at volunteering. Also there other options might be included. We could look at organizational mission, we could look at different stakeholder characteristics such as motivation. So overall we conclude there is not a real effect of dependence or independence, not in a positive or a negative way. So therefore it's probably more valuable to look at very specific partner characteristics to see whether it has an effect on stakeholder supporting intentions for a particular target organization. So this was our presentation, and we really look forward to receiving your feedback and suggestions through our email addresses.